Thank you. I'd like to declare the ordinary council meeting of Tuesday the 15th of September 2020 open. It's now 6 p.m. We acknowledge the Whadjuk people, the traditional custodians of the land. We also pay our respects, of course, to elders both past, present. May I ask everyone present this evening to please turn off electronic devices. That includes mobile telephones, iPads and tablets for the duration of the meeting. Tonight's council meeting is being recorded and a copy of the audio recording shall be available on the city's website within 72 hours of the completion of this meeting. The remainder of the disclaimer can be seen on the screen in front of you all. At item 2, attendance, apologies, there are none. All councillors are present in the chamber except Councillor Lindsay Holland. Approve leave of absence, there is none. Disclosures of interest, CEO will refer to you.
Thank you, Mayor. I have received a declaration of impartiality from Councillor Barry in relation to item number EN-020-20. The agenda page number is page 79. The item details, request for tender 09/2019 for mobile tree, turf and tube stock watering. The nature of association is that Councillor Barry has a son-in-law who works for the tender applicant. And Councillor Barry will read that declaration before the item is moved and seconded. Thank you.
Thank you, CEO, and thank you, Councillor Barry. That being the only disclosure of interest received, we'll move to item 4, announcements by the presiding member. Just wanted to read a little bit about the Urban Forest Strategy Award win by the City recently. As many of you know, last month the City's Urban Forest Strategy was recognised at Parks and Leisure Australia's 2020 WA Awards of Excellence. This prestigious event, held by the sector's peak body, recognises and celebrates the outstanding initiatives and innovative efforts of the people behind the places, which provide social, environmental and economic benefits to the community. The strategy took out the Strategic Planning Award, which recognises the development of strategies for parks and other sport and recreational spaces by rewarding outstanding examples of strategic planning that have enriched and revitalised a community. This award is testament to the outstanding work of City staff alongside lead consultant Arbon Carbon and of the continued commitment by this council to create a cooler and greener Canning. It's an ambitious plan, but an attainable one, and it is undoubtedly in keeping with the wishes and expectations of our community. The strategy is more than words on a piece of paper. It sets the city's course for the future and will result in environmental benefits for generations to come. The Urban Forest Strategy will now go into the running for the National Awards of Excellence. On behalf of Council, I'd like to congratulate all involved and I wish you well in the National Awards next month. Thanks, everybody. Reports of delegates without discussion. Are there any delegate reports that members wish to table? No. At item 5, we will move on to item 6, which are question time for the public. Response to previous questions taken on notice at item 6.1, there are none. In regards to questions from the public, I'll just read the preamble and open public question time at 6:03 p.m. The time set aside for public question time is 15 minutes, which may be extended if necessary. For recording purposes, please state your name and address and then proceed to ask your question. If an answer cannot be provided at tonight's meeting, the question will be taken on notice and an answer will be provided at the next ordinary council meeting. In accordance with policy AD02, members of the public who have registered their questions with the City's administration shall be called upon in the order in which registrations were received. Written questions will precede verbal questions. The City has received questions for tonight's meeting from Mrs. Searle and Mr. David Brown. Mrs. Searle, first of all, I'd ask you just to come to the podium and please go ahead and ask your question.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, elected members, CEO and staff. My name is Olwen Searle. My address is number 6, Melaleuca Court in Canning Vale. My first question, how many parks are there in the City of Canning on which playground equipment is located?
Just for the sake of the record, it's 6:05 and Councillor Holland is entering the room. Thank you, Councillor. Director Bowe.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. We have 137 parks within the City of Canning, Ms Searle, 142 playgrounds within those 137 parks.
Thank you. And my second question, what is the City's budget for the maintenance of city parks?
Director.
In 2019-2020, the budget to maintain all of the parks within the city was $11,246,560.
Thank you. And your final question?
Thank you. And my third question, how many parks in the city provide inclusive play equipment specifically designed for children with disabilities and those children using a wheelchair?
Director.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Unfortunately, the city only has 4 parks that meet those specifications, Ms Searle. They are Shelley Beach Park, Sheldrake Park, Fern Park and Sir Albert Jennings Park. But the city has identified a shortcoming in that area, and item 2 in its play provision strategy identifies to review and improve the accessibility and inclusivity of current playgrounds. There are only a few playgrounds in Canning that have inclusive elements, and this is mainly some areas of soft fall rubber ground surface to enable access to play equipment, such as in those aforementioned parks. There's also a wheelchair accessible Liberty Swing at Shelley Beach Park. However, this is unfortunately rarely used, probably due to the need to plan ahead and borrow a key to access it. The city has an ongoing disability access program that is installing access paths to playgrounds, providing better wheeled access for wheelchairs and prams into our play equipment areas. This program has delivered access pathways to a number of playgrounds and will continue into the future.
Thank you for coming along tonight. I appreciate it. If you've got any further questions, we'd very much appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity, Mr Mayor. I will be writing individually to every member of the council, and I will hope that I will have an individual response from every single one of them.
Terrific.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr Aldridge.
Good evening, Mr Mayor and councillors. From what I can gather, the men's shed only opens up from about 9 o'clock in the morning to 12. So I was wondering why the Canning Arts Group site was deemed unsuitable for the men's shed.
Well, certainly has. Director Adams.
So the Canning Men's Shed were looking for an area where they could build their own shed and utilise industrial type machinery. So they do a lot of woodworking. So in terms of looking for a suitable location for them, we looked at, in conjunction with them, a number of different sites, and the site that council agreed to at the last meeting was the one that was deemed to be most suitable. There probably are some other sites that could be suitable, but that was the one that was deemed most suitable for them.
Mr Aldridge, your second question.
Just to confirm, but the CAG site was deemed unsuitable?
Director Adams.
I'm not sure whether it was deemed suitable or unsuitable, but there were a number of sites that were looked at, and the one that was deemed most suitable was the one that was proposed to council and adopted by council at the last meeting.
Sure. If you're unsure, could you please take that on notice?
I don't think we'll be taking on notice. I think he just provided a suitable answer, an adequate answer. I think his exact words were somewhere along the line. It was deemed to be not unsuitable, but less suitable than the chosen site.
So it was deemed suitable. It wasn't deemed unsuitable. That's good to know.
I don't think you need to be putting words in my mouth, Mr. Aldridge.
Well,
Show some respect and move
I'm
on.
unclear as to the answer
I'm
to the
not
question,
proposing
sir.
to argue with you tonight, so ask your third question, or please sit down.
How much was spent on maintenance over the last 5 years on the City of Canning Arts Group building, or the Arts Group building, the CAG site building itself?
Are we able to answer that question, Director?
I'll have to take that on notice.
That question we will take on notice. Thank you, Mr. Aldridge.
Thank you. I'd really appreciate if you could take both on notice.
I've already told you we won't be taking the first of those questions on notice. Mr. Brown, my humble apologies. I've allowed Mr. Aldridge to jump the gun there a bit. You did pose a few questions in writing, so welcome to the podium. Please introduce yourself and ask your question.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. David Brown, 30 Sinian Crescent, Willerton. I sent through 3 questions, but I'm actually only going to ask the last one. We are told by city officials that as part of the ongoing demolition of existing facilities currently in use, that the city has a strategy to demolish the existing TS Canning and Sea Scouts building on Centenary Avenue and build a multi-purpose boating facility in the area. We have been hearing about this very expensive cost of redeveloping this contaminated tip site for well over a decade. So we would like to know, what is the time frame to complete building facilities at this site?
Director Warren Bowe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Brown, the city does not have a strategy to demolish any of the buildings at TS Canning. Some preliminary feasibility study works are proposed to investigate the opportunity of a water-based activity hub at Centenary Park West, but there is no strategy, so no time frame for the demolition.
Right, okay, that's not what we were told, but anyway. Is the city aware that virtually no craft are ever launched by the existing lessees from this from these water-based organizations because the river is severely silted since dredging was stopped many years ago? So currently boating usually cannot occur from this site?
Director Bowe?
Yes, we are, Mr. Mayor.
Short answer, yes, they are.
Okay. We have been asking these questions for many years, but hopefully there has been some progress. As dredging the river is the only viable option to allow all types of boating to occur at this site, has the city approached the relevant authorities to find out if the area can be dredged?
Director Bowe, can you speak about the likelihood of that occurrence?
Yes, I can answer that, Mr. Mayor. No, we have not.
Has any assessment been done in that case of the recurrent costs of dredging?
I'll allow the question. That's your final question, Dr. Brown. That's 4.
Okay. Well, they were sub-questions. I would have asked them
were very
together.
short answers.
Okay.
Sorry, just your question. Want to repeat it? I interrupted you.
Sorry?
Did you want to repeat the question?
Okay, yes. What are the recurrent costs involved in dredging the area, and has a formal assessment of the environmental impacts been undertaken for dredging of the area?
Director Bowe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The recurrent costs are unknown and no preliminary works have been undertaken in that matter.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. Are there any other further questions before we move on? Thank you. I'll close public question time now. The time is who? I can't see you over there, sorry. Mrs. Aldridge, you want to come to the podium?
Sorry, she's sat here. Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, councillors and City Administration. My name is Marnie Aldridge, 5 Minota Avenue in Shelley. Mr. Director Bowe, I'd just like to say thank you very much to you and your department for the new playground equipment at Shelley Beach. It's been greatly appreciated and it's caused a real buzz in the community. So much so that there's a lot of discussion and speculation about the new playground at Shelley Beach. It's a lot of excitement happening, but there's also some confusion. So can I just double check and clarify, is there going to be any community consultation about the types of playground equipment?
Mrs. Aldridge, I'll just ask you to direct your questions through me. It's not a conversation between you and the staff. Director Bowe, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for the positive feedback, Mrs. Aldridge. It did take some time to rectify that issue. In relation to the engagement regarding the play equipment, once the redevelopment of the Shelley Beach Park has been considered and once Council has arrived at a position on the master plan, that will be the lead as to whether the administration further engage with the community. But our play provision strategy does require us to engage with the local community in relation to playground upgrades and renewals.
Great.
Mrs. Aldridge, your second question.
What's the estimated budget for the playground upgrade in the master plans?
Director Bowe.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I might just ask Executive Manager Dion Johnson to answer that question. He has a greater level of clarity than myself on the numbers there.
Mr Johnson, can I ask you to respond?
Yep, through you, Mr Mayor. From memory, it's about 1.3 million.
Thank you. Mrs Aldridge, your third and final question. Thank you.
And could I also confirm then, is the playground design will be the same amongst all three master plans? There won't be any difference between the playground designs?
Director Bowe, will there be consistency amongst the three designs?
It's really only a concept at the moment, Mr Mayor, but the estimates are all consistent with the same level of service across each of the three options for the district level playground. Yes.
Terrific. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Mrs Aldridge. In the absence of any further questions, I will close public question time now, and the time is 6:15 p.m. Thank you. Confirmation of minutes. The ordinary council at item 7. The ordinary council meeting held on Tuesday, 18th of August 2020. The officer's recommendation is on the screen that the minutes of the ordinary council meeting held on that date be taken as read and confirmed. The recommendation is also on page 2 of tonight's agenda. Can I have a mover, please, councillors? Councillor Holland, thank you. Seconder is Councillor Bain. We'll put the matter to the vote.
The motion to confirm the OCM minutes for the August meeting have been carried unanimously, 11 in favour.
Thank you, and thank you, councillors. We'll move on to item 8, which is receiving of petitions, presentations and deputations. Petitions at item 8.1, there are none. Presentations at item 8.2, there are none. We do have a deputation tonight. Deputation has been approved for Mr Richard Aldridge regarding policy CM 106, strategic management of property assets. Mr Aldridge, would you like to step forward? You have 10 minutes to make your deputation. Thank you.
Okay, should land currently retained for the protection and benefit of natural environment while under the management of the City of Canning be treated commercially? Should it be used to enhance the City of Canning's economic capacity? Basically, I read that and I say, should our environment be turned into a cash cow, as per policy CM 106? I think the majority of the council would just turn around and say, no, it shouldn't. And I think most of the people that you represent would also think, no, of course our environmental land, which has been put aside for protection, shouldn't have an economic. So tonight, if your answer to that is no, at some stage you need to change it. You need to review and amend this policy CM 106. Because the future of the city's land holding and the land utilisations are going to be guided by your policy. This is a policy that was set by this council, and it's called the Strategic Management of Property Assets. Now, the current idea, from what I can gather from reading the minutes, is that you're going to go ahead and do the utilisation strategies, and then you're going to come back and retrospectively change the council policy to fit those strategies. I think that's a bit of putting the cart before the horse. The city's land utilisation strategies will be guided by an outdated policy if you do that. A policy that does not necessarily reflect the council's intentions. And this will inevitably lead to land utilisation strategies which don't necessarily reflect this council's desires. So the simple solution is, why not review the policy first? If you review the policy before you start the land utilisation strategy, you give the staff that work here at the City of Canning a very clear and focused and current council policy guideline to follow in regards to land. Staff will follow the policy guidelines that reflect the up-to-date policy decisions of the council and the people that they represent. This council is the decision-making body as far as policy is concerned, so it's completely in your hands. The city administration and the staff must implement the policies that you set. So in effect, by not reviewing the policy first, you're basically forcing the staff to follow this outdated policy rather than having a new policy to follow. Okay, CM 106 includes the following definition, and CM 106 is applied to all properties within the property asset portfolio of the city. It includes your public open spaces and your other reserves. Property vested in the care, control and management of the city by the state and developed for the active and passive recreational use of the public, or even the land that's retained for the protection of the benefit of the natural environment. So at current, your policy is that land which is retained for the protection and benefit of the natural environment should be managed with a commercial approach. I think Director Adams, I asked a question last week, won't put words in his mouth, but said that that is unintuitive. Or that land developed for an active and passive recreational use by the public should be used to enhance the City of Canning's economic capacity. I don't think this council should be relying on the intuition of the staff as to how this policy should be implemented. I think the policy itself needs to be clarified and rewritten. As it stands, CM 106 is the guiding policy for all the land that belongs to and is under the management of the City of Canning, and it will guide the future land utilisation strategy. And what about the civic land? Civic land which is used to deliver services like the Canning Arts Group, tennis club, bowling clubs, basketball, etc., etc. Does the council really wish that this land should also be to solely enhance the City of Canning's economic capacity, or do they want to think it's just a service? It's something they pay their rates for. So I'd really like to see a push by the council to revise and review CM 106, the strategic management of property. It's in dire need of a review. The future of land utilisation in the city will be guided by this policy, and the management of property assets should be reflecting the intentions of this council. I don't know how you go about doing this. Maybe move a procedural motion to postpone CC 05020 until after the review of the policy, or request the CEO kindly to draft a revision of the policy. But basically, you shouldn't have environmental land being considered as an economic opportunity for the city. I don't think that's what is intended by this council. And I think that by reviewing the policy, it gives the council the power. It gives the council the power to decide how you're going to utilise the major asset of the city. So please consider it. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. CEO, I'm going to ask you a question. Mr. Aldridge made a number of claims. Mr. Aldridge, you can sit down. Thank you. Mr. Aldridge made a number of claims in his deputation about an item that's about to be put to council for a decision, and I wondered if it'd be appropriate to ask Director Adams to provide some sort of response. Also, on the fact that he actually said he wouldn't put words in Director Adams's mouth, and then did actually quote him. So I think I want to actually know whether what was said was actually factual, and if it wasn't, I think in the confines of balance, we should know. CEO.
Thank you, Mayor. As staff, we have an obligation to provide you with accurate and timely information. It is appropriate to ask Mr. Adams to respond in terms of clarifying any points that need to be clarified in what Mr. Aldridge has said. So, by all means.
Director, can I just ask if there are anything raised there, including the quote that was attributed to you by Mr. Aldridge, that you please keep your answers succinct and brief, and just to the point. If there were claims made by Mr. Aldridge that are not factual, then I think we should know about that. So I'll ask for your comment, please.
Okay. Firstly, I would have used the words counter-intuitive, not unintuitive. CM 106 is the current policy adopted by Council with regard to management of property assets, and it is agreed that the policy is in need of review or rescission, especially if the land utilisation plan is adopted as per the officer recommendation. So we're actually recommending that it's reviewed. There are a number of points made by Mr. Aldridge that I think are taken out of context a little bit, and one of them, other than the definition, the only reference to public open space in CM 106 is in paragraph 3.2a, which references the proceeds of any sale of land zone parks and recreation being used to purchase public open space or for capital improvements to public open space. So it's not about selling public open space or commercialising it. In response to his question, should land currently retained for the protection and benefit of natural environment be used to enhance the economic capacity? The answer is clearly no, and the rest of the policy supports that, as the policy statement says the City of Canning will be guided by this policy in managing its property assets with the objective of enhancing its economic capacity and delivering the community goals outlined in the City's Strategic Community Plan. So it should actually be noted that City officers do not make decisions around land assets, as all acquisitions and disposals are brought before Council for decision. Should also be noted that on a number of occasions, based on officer recommendations, Council has made decisions to purchase land purely for conservation or open space purposes, Gerard Street, Crawford Street, for example, and has decided not to proceed with the development of open space, for example, Hilltop Rise and Willeri Park. So commercialisation has never been the only consideration. CM 106 is not the only guiding policy or strategy for land that belongs to or is under the management of the City. As stated in the Land Utilisation Plan, when making decisions around land asset, the City pays regard to documents such as the Strategic Community Plan, local planning schemes and structure plans, the local planning strategy, the local biodiversity strategy, the long-term financial plan, public open space strategy, urban forest strategy, and a number of other policies. These strategies and plans, once adopted, set the policy direction of Council. These were developed and or updated after CM 106. Therefore, any revised policy would need to consider this. And just to finish off, the Land Utilisation Plan is a much more robust framework to guide the City employees in taking a holistic approach to making recommendations to Council with regard to land assets. It's been prepared over a 2-year period with the input of Council and City staff involved in in the management of all types of the City's land assets. It lists 13 financial criteria, 9 economic criteria, 6 social criteria, and 6 environmental criteria that the City will use in evaluating land assets before making recommendations to Council. So given what's contained in the land utilisation plan, if that is adopted, then it is somewhat debatable whether we need policy such as CM 106 with regard to the types of criteria that we use, because they're already contained in a Council adopted plan. I guess the only thing that's left over is the other part of that particular policy, which deals with how we address development applications on City-owned land when there's a perceived conflict of interest. So that might need to go into another policy. So yes, CM 106 is in need of review, but I wouldn't want people to think that that is the only document that the City uses, and the land utilisation plan is intended to take a much more holistic approach than that policy ever did.
Thanks for your clarification, Director. Thank you, CEO, for your advice. We'll move to item 9, which is applications for leave of absence. I've received none. We move to 10, questions by members of which notice has been given. There are none. Items brought forward for the convenience of the public gallery. There are none. Reports of committee meetings. Just a note, the CEO Performance Review Committee report, CC 05320, the Chief Executive Officer's annual performance and salary review will of course be dealt with at item 16 as a confidential matter in the agenda. So they'll be dealt with a little bit later on. Move to item 13, which is reports, Office of the CEO. There are none. Item 13.2, which we've just been discussing, is CC 050 of 20, the Land Utilisation Plan 2020-25. The responsible officer is Director Gary Adams, the Director of Canning Community and Commercial. The recommendation, councillors, is on page of tonight's agenda and is also on the screen in front of you. Can I have a mover, please, and a seconder? For mover. Thank you. Councillor Kunza, a seconder. Councillor Spencer, Councillor Sweeney. Councillor Kunza.
Yes, Mr Mayor, I'm happy to support the officer recommendation. I think this is a giant step in terms of looking at strategic opportunities throughout the city, looking at not just commercial, but looking at positive social, community and environmental outcomes for our local community. And I think the relevant staff have done a giant job in terms of preparing the work here and not just looking at it from a commercial aspect in the past, but looking at the triple bottom line, looking at it from an environmental and a community aspect as well. And we've had a number of parcels of land around the city that could be utilised better for a community aspect. And it's great that we're now looking at those opportunities. And as Director Adams said in his response, I think it's fantastic that the City of Canning is actually looking at a strategic purchase of environmental land as well. I think it's a great way of looking forward into the future, and I hope that Council supports this recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Kunza. Councillor Sweeney, have you got anything you'd like to add?
No, nothing further from me, thanks, Mr Mayor.
Does anyone like to speak against it? Councillor Holland?
Actually, I've just got a couple of questions, if I may.
Yep, go ahead.
That have arisen since Mr Aldridge's presentation, which some things I hadn't thought about, which is good to get them brought to the front of my mind. Would it be correct that we do a review of the policy before we do this land utilisation plan? That sounded quite like a logical step to me, to actually review the policy first. Could I have a response from Director Adams, please?
Director Adams, did you just want to go through that again?
So this land, CM 106 was done when I think all we had was the commercial land asset strategy. So the policy is based on that particular strategy. Policies are usually based on a strategy or a plan. And our view is that the land utilisation plan, with what's detailed in there, probably negates the need for any additional policy. However, if in the interim, when we are reviewing a piece of land and there is a conflict between the policy and the land utilisation plan, then any such conflict would be identified in the report for Council to be aware of when making any decision on that particular piece of land. All of the decisions made on land are Council decisions, and the policy is there to guide those decisions. We are now at the stage where we have a much more comprehensive guide in making those decisions. Council can opt to have a policy that reflects what's in this plan. If Council adopts this, then this is the Council position with regard to how we evaluate land assets. So there is potential that we don't need this CM 106 once this plan is adopted. However, if council does feel a need to have a policy additional to this, it's something that we will discuss with you at a workshop and work out exactly what needs to go in that policy and what documents it needs to refer to, because there are a whole range of documents that didn't exist that refer to land assets now when CM 106 was first put together.
Councillor Holland, did that address the issue? You really basically you're asking why are we putting the cart before the horse, practically. Was your question answered?
Yeah, that one was pretty well, and it is a question. I thought it was a good terminology, actually, the cart and the horse, actually, with this one. But another thing, I'm not against the land utilisation plan at all. That's not the point here whatsoever. But I was thinking, shouldn't we have an overriding policy as the guide for plans which would sit underneath? That's where it's just come to mind for that would be the normal guiding philosophy that a council would do. You have your policy which guides the plan. Is that not correct?
I'll just get you just to provide a little bit more information about that. I think that would be the concern as we see it at the moment, is just that question that was raised by Mr. Aldridge earlier. So if we can provide just a little bit of clarity around the reasoning why the policy will be reviewed after the plan has been adopted.
So this plan, when you adopt it, is the council position on how staff will firstly assess land assets and base their recommendations on that when they bring recommendations to council. So this is the council position. What normally happens is when we have strategies and plans, the policies come out of those strategies and plans because they tell us how to further implement elements of those strategies and plans. So they're council positions on particular elements. So it may be that council determines that they want to have a specific policy on commercial land assets that takes into account what's in here but only deals with commercial land assets. Because that's what CM 106 in essence was intended to do. So that'll be a policy that's guided by this particular plan. As council may wish to have a number of other policies that also reference this plan. So no, you don't need to do the policy before the plan because it'll be difficult for us to refer to the plan in the policy if the plan hasn't first been adopted.
Can I just ask, just to clarify, and that was a good final point, can you give an example, Director, of a similar turn of events where we have had a strategy? Director Bowe? Yeah. I just think there's a little bit of uncertainty with the council thinking this is out of the norm, so perhaps if we could just provide some assurance, Director Bowe.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think that the situation that springs to mind is in relation to the street tree strategy. So the city, the council endorsed a street tree strategy a couple of years ago now. There are a number of policies that that predated the adoption of the street tree strategy that are still in operation at the moment, that are still the subject of a further review, and that still will have reference and be not entirely aligned with the objectives of the street tree strategy. But in all instances where there's a significant departure, we would refer the matter to council for determination. But in effect, we administer both documents in concert without any major issues.
I think that so the brief answer is that the policy would refer, the strategy would refer to the policy would refer to the strategy, and so yeah, it's not outside the norm to actually do that. The strategy will form council's position tonight on how we deal with it. The policy will be written in keeping with that, and will be reviewed in alignment with the strategy. Does that make it clear? I think you had a follow-up question anyway. I think, Councillor, didn't you? I think you had a follow-up question anyway, didn't you?
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. Yeah, I understood that. Thank you very much for your response, directors. So that would, the the plan that we're voting on tonight, does that already take into account the city's commercial land asset strategy that we voted on in 2016? I just want to make sure I'm getting my head around this completely.
Director Adams.
That's the last question, thank you.
So it will supersede that strategy because that strategy only dealt with commercial assets and didn't go into the amount of detail that we go into in this particular plan. So when we're looking at all land, there are, as I said, 13 financial criteria, 9 economic criteria, 6 social criteria, and 6 environmental criteria that we will use in evaluating land within this framework before we make a recommendation to council.
So the strategy over, yep, got that. Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Barry, did you have a question?
Yeah, no, thanks, Mr. Mayor. So in relation to, I mean, let me get this right. Are we saying that the policy as we have it now is basically obsolete and it sits within the land utilisation plan now?
Director.
So in adopting the land utilisation plan, council is in effect adopting a new position, if you like, on land assets that is much more holistic than was ever contemplated with CM 106 or the commercial land asset strategy. So this is a much more holistic position adopted by council, and it ensures that when we're making recommendations, we evaluate the land on a much broader range of criteria than was ever in CM 106. However, while both is in operation, if there is a conflict between them and we're bringing something to council, then we would make that clear in the report that there's a conflict. Remembering that the policy is a guiding document. Council can make a decision outside of that policy, and as we would normally do if we're asking council to make decisions outside of policy, then we would highlight that to you, as we would if we're making asking council to make decisions that are outside of previously adopted positions.
So the next question then is, if the land utilisation 2025 goes through tonight, is there anything in the current CM 106 that does conflict with any business we will do until such time as we either amend, change or rescind CM 106?
Director Adams.
So not that we can immediately see, other than the fact that we will be evaluating land on a much broader set of criteria than is in CM 106. So there's a number of criteria in CM 106. They've been broadened and more clearly specified in here. Not immediately, there's nothing immediately apparent that would prevent us from putting anything forward to council. And as I said, if it did become apparent that there was a conflict between the two, we would highlight that in any report, because council is able to make decisions that are outside of policy or adopted policy positions. Okay, and one final one. So this workshop that we're talking about, how soon will this come about? Have the officers been working on the amendments to the policy at all?
Director?
So if the land utilisation plan is adopted, the policy review will commence immediately with the intent of putting a draft before council by the end of the year. Okay, and I take on board what you're saying, and I think it's 5.5, the real or perceived interest. I mean, I'm a great one on that, so whatever happens, I don't think we should chuck that one out just for the sake of propriety. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone want to speak against the matter? or ask a question before we put it to the vote? Councillor Ponaturai, you wish to speak against it or ask a question?
No, I'm happy with the questions, Councillor Holland and Councillor Barry, and the answer from Director Adams. I'm sure that we all had the same question. I support the land utilization plan as such, and I also, with the due respect with Mr. Aldridge's concern about whether land is used for environmental. Yes, we should care for that, but sometimes we do need to have a balanced economy too. So to have the balanced economy, so we do build sports clubs and arts groups and or community centers. So we need to balance it, and I hope with the tree canopy plan increasing the trees, so that will also increase our parks to look better or natural environment as well. And part of the revitalizing cities and town centers, which is important to have both. We can't have just environment because unfortunately we do need money, but I really respect his concern, and I'm sure we try to balance the economy in the city, and I'm look forward to see the CM 106 policy at the earliest and support that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. If we don't have a councillor wishing to speak against the matter, I might just put it to the vote. Thank you, councillors. We'll put this to the vote.
Motion CC-050-20 is being carried unanimously, 11 in favour.
Thank you, councillors. We'll move on to CC 052 of 20, the monthly financial report, August 2020. Just all sorted? Got that? Thank you very much. Councillors, and just to be noted, obviously there's been a slight change to the recommendation. You're all aware of it. It's been obviously made aware of it. That is in relation to part 5 of the recommendation. The recommendation is on page 29 of the agenda and is on the screen. Can I have a mover, please? A mover? Councillor Sabiri, thank you very much. And a seconder? Councillor Spencer-Teo. Councillor Sabiri, have you got anything you'd like to say?
I support the officer recommendation.
Thank you very much. Councillor Spencer-Teo.
Nothing to add, thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Does any councillor wish to speak against the matter before we put it to the vote? Thank you, councillors. Let's put the matter to the vote. Any minute.
Motion CC-052-20 is being carried unanimously with 11 in favour.
Thank you, Governance. We move on to item 13.3 on tonight's agenda. The report is SD 018 of 20. The title of that report is Canning City Centre, Approval of Cecil Avenue East Costs, Department of Communities Land Agreements and Impacts on the Long-Term Financial Plan. The responsible officer is Mr. Graham Bride, the Director of Canning Sustainable Development. The recommendation is on page 57 of tonight's agenda and is also on the screen. I've got the Deputy Mayor who's got his hand up. Deputy Mayor is moving that, thank you, and Councillor Sabiri is seconding it. Deputy Mayor Jesse Jacobs.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. This is the second piece of the puzzle for our city centre project. I'm happy I've reviewed this documentation, and I'm happy that on the strategic level this is good for us. It represents a significant investment by our city, but that's what we've been planning for over time. I'm happy that a lot of other tiers of government are assisting us. I think that's great, and also people like Main Roads and the Public Transport Authority. So I think it's great. I'm looking forward to that development extending. Sort of only got half of it done, and it's. I think it's good. It represents that we have a vision for the city centre. We have confidence, and I think once we're finished, it'll be one of those little city centres that'll be as good as anywhere in Perth and arguably Australia. Thank you.
Better than any in Perth or Australia, Deputy Mayor, I think. Councillor Sabiri.
Thank you. I also support the officer's recommendation and hope that all other councillors also support this. We've seen a great transformation of Cecil Avenue West and most recently the Wall Street Basin Next Generation Park, which I think we were all very proud of. And this extension for the upgrades to Cecil Avenue East are really important because obviously it's related and linked to the Cecil Avenue West, but also these works already have seen more people walking and cycling, but also will add to reduce congestion of Cecil Avenue altogether. And other part that I find is going to be, hopefully is going to be similar to Wall Street Basin Park and maybe beat that, but is the upgrade to Lake Street Urban Stream. And not only do they have an environmental benefit such as water purification and stormwater management and create a connectivity for all the ecosystem on multiple layers, but also we will see, I guess, an area that has prohibited entry and is dangerous, changing to one that is more connected and encourages walking through these areas, which will also make the city a safer place. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Sabiri. Does anyone wish to speak against the matter before we put it to the vote? Thank you, councillors. Let's put the matter to the vote. Thank you.
Motion SD-018-20 has been carried unanimously, 11 in favour.
Thank you, governments. We move on to SD-019 of 20. The title of that report is the appointment of City of Canning Design Review Panel Chair, Deputy Chair and members. The officer's recommendation is on page 72 of tonight's agenda and is also on the screen in front of us all as we speak. Can I have a mover for that item, please? Just a mover, Councillor. Thank you very much, Councillor Ponaturai, and a seconder. Councillor Bain, thank you. Councillor Ponaturai, have you got anything you'd like to say?
Nothing to add, Mr Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bain?
Nothing further to add. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillors, does anyone wish to speak against the matter before we put it to the vote? No? Let's put the matter to the vote. Thank you.
Motion SD-019-20 has been carried unanimously, 11 in favour.
Thank you, Governors. We move to item 13.4. Mr Warren Bowe, Director, Canning Environment, is the responsible officer. The item is EN 020 of 20, request for tender 092019 for mobile tree, turf and tube stock watering. The officer's recommendation is on the screen. It is also, I don't have a page 80 of tonight's agenda. I have Councillor Barry. Previously, a declaration of impartiality was made and read to the meeting by the CEO. I'll just ask Councillor Barry to read aloud his declaration. Thank you, Councillor Barry.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, for the sake of the interest, the report item is EN 2020. Report title is request for tender 0/2019, mobile turf tube stock watering. My interest is in impartiality. The nature of my interest is that my son-in-law works for an applicant in the tender in E2020. The extent of the interest is as above. Well, I'm not going to seek council approval, but I won't be in the room because I believe there would be some questions on my impartiality. So I'll leave the room now and you can call me back when you're finished. Yes. Thank you.
Totally your prerogative. Thank you, Councillor Barry. And just for the sake of the meeting and the recording, Councillor Barry is leaving the chamber now. It's about 7:53 p.m. Councillors, just on that, 6:53, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Councillors, just in relation to what just occurred, governors came to us and made a suggestion, which I I agree with, just in relation to the CEO generally would read these declarations, but we think it's important just for the sake of the recording and for consistency and accountability, just that the councillors also read them out just before the item. So I think that's we've just introduced it. I think it'll work. If you've got any comments, I'd like to hear them at some stage, but it's a very small but important change, I think, to the meeting procedure. Just in relation to that item, can I have a mover, please? Councillor Spencer-Teo, and Councillor Porter will be our seconder. Councillor Spencer-Teo, have you got anything you'd like to say in relation to that matter?
Nothing to add, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Porter?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I speak in support of this item since watering trees is important. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Porter. Would anyone like to speak against the item or ask a question? No? Let's put the matter to the vote. Thank you, councillors.
Motion EN-020-20 has been carried with 10 in favour, noting Councillor Barry was not present for the vote.
Just for the sake of the record, Councillor Barry is just returning to the room. It's 6:55 p.m. Thank you, Councillor Barry. He's retained his seat. We move to EN-021-20, Sustainability and Environment Advisory Group, unconfirmed minutes. The recommendation is on page 90 of the agenda and is also on the screen. Can I have a mover, please, for that item? Councillor Ponaturai, thank you. And the seconder is Councillor Porter. Councillor Ponaturai.
Nothing to add, Mr. Mayor, thank you.
Councillor Porter.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I speak in support of the officer recommendation.
Thank you, councillors. Unless we have somebody wishing to speak against the matter, we'll put it to the vote.
Councillor Ponathoura, I don't have your vote. Motion EN-021-20 has been carried unanimously, 11 in favour.
Thank you, councillors. We move to items EN-022-20. The title of that report is Request for Tender 04/2020 for pre-qualified panel of suppliers for the hire of multi-skilled operators and associated plant. The recommendation is on page 100 of tonight's agenda and is also on the screen. Can I have a mover for that item, please? A mover. Thank you, Councillor Porter. A seconder. Councillor Kunza. Thank you. Councillor Porter.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I speak in support of the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Porter. Councillor Kunza.
I also speak in support of the officer recommendation.
Thank you, councillors. Anyone wish to ask a question or speak against the matter? Councillor Barry.
Not speak against. Just a point that I made. I did speak to Director Bowe in relation to this item today. It had to do with some questions that related to the confidential section. And once again, I'd probably only like to say that I think in instances, I missed the boat myself. I probably should have asked that this be heard behind closed doors, because the questions that I did need to ask certainly are confidential. But in light of that, I won't speak against it. But I mean, I would ask that we in future don't split. If we're sort of splitting, you know, to a public part with a confidential. If there's confidential information, I think then it basically should be a confidential item. That's my opinion. I mean, you don't have to take that, but in saying that, I'll speak for the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barry. Anybody else before we put the matter to the vote? Councillor Porter, would you like to close? I think, well, Councillor Barry wasn't actually speaking against the item, so we'll just put the matter to the vote. Thank you, councillors.
Motion EN-022-20 has been carried unanimously, 11 in favour.
Thank you, Governors. We move on to item EN-024 of 20. The title of that report is the St James Network Renewal Underground program pilot, in brackets NRUPP. The recommendation is on page 109 of tonight's agenda and is also on the screen here in the chamber. Can I have a mover for that item, please? Deputy Mayor, and the seconder I had was Councillor Holland. Deputy Mayor.
Welcome this investment in improving electricity infrastructure in St James. I think we are particularly fortunate to have been shortlisted with 4 other councils. For many years, power undergrounding was far out of reach for this area. I welcome the pilot program and hope that this is the start of a program that may see some of our less well-off areas better to enjoy the amenity. Makes so much sense from a point of perspective of putting those power lines underground and just freeing up that space for people to enjoy the suburb. That's all. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Jacobs. Councillor Holland, anything you'd like to add?
Nothing further, thank you, Mr Mayor. I speak for the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Holland. Is anyone wishing to speak against this matter before we put it to the vote? Thank you, councillors. Let's put the matter to the vote.
Motion EN-024-20 has been carried unanimously, 11 in favour.
Thank you, Governance. Thank you, councillors. We'll move on to item 14. That's the end of the reports for the time being. Item 14, motions of which previous notice has been given. There are none. Item 15, urgent business. There is none. Confidential matters. Can I have a mover and a seconder, please, that items CC 049 of 20, CC 051 of 20 and CC 053 of 20 be dealt with behind closed doors in accordance with section 5.23 in brackets 2 of the Local Government Act 1995. Can I have a mover, please? Councillor Barry has moved it. Councillor Bain has seconded it. Thank you, Councillor Barry, and thank you, Councillor Bain. We'll put the matter to the vote.
The motion to close doors for confidential session has been carried unanimously, 11 in favour.
Councillors, I just need to ask for a mover that we return. Councillor Sabiri, thank you. Seconded by Councillor Kunza, that we actually return now to our meeting and come out of confidential cover. We'll put that to the vote. Thank you.
Motion to reopen the doors to the public has been carried unanimously, 11 in favour. Good.
Thank you, councillors. Just for the record, the time now is 8:15 p.m. and we are now resuming the meeting. I will run through. I might just ask the CEO and executives to come back into the room. I think they're pretending not to be able to hear us out there. Governance, can I just ask a question in relation to, I've got you all, in relation to the council decision in relation to the disposal and sale of the first item, which was in 7 Oak Street, Cannington. Am I still reading that, which names does it? It names the company involved, even though it hasn't been adopted? I do? Okay. Councillors, we're now back into open session. In regards to item CC 049 of 20, the title of that report was Expression of Interest, Disposal and Sale of Portion of Lot 1 in brackets 233, 7 Oak Street in Cannington. The officer's recommendation, and I'll read right through it, the officer's recommendation was that council, pursuant to section 3.58 in brackets 3 of the Local Government Act 1995, approves the sale of approximately 1,300 to 1,400 square metres of land on lot 1 in brackets 233 7 Oak Street, Kennington, to Thycan, spelt Thican, Thycan Proprietary Limited, subject to the following special conditions and requirements outlined in paragraph 40 of this report. 2, subject to satisfaction of the special conditions and requirements under Part 1 at the appropriate points in time, authorises the Chief Executive Officer to undertake the signing of relevant legal agreements and associated documents to complete the land transaction. And 3, pursuant to section 6.8 of the Local Government Act 1995, approves a budget amendment to 2020 to 21 adopted budget and allocates $300,000 from the city's Land, Building and Development Reserve for the required capital works to facilitate the preparation of the land as a development-ready lot, with any unused funds returned to the reserve. And 4, authorises the allocation of the proceeds of sale to the Land, Building and Development Reserve. An absolute majority was required. And in relation to that vote,
Confirm, Mayor, the vote was lost, 5-6. Those councillors voting against was councillors Bain, Barry, Holland, Porter, Sabiri and Sweeney.
thank you. That matter not being carried, we then move to item CC 051 of 20. The title of that report, acquisition of 153 to 155, being Lot 1, George Street, Queen's Park, and 172 being Lot 4, Railway Parade, Queen's Park. The officer's recommendation was that council approves the acquisition of 153 to 155, Lot 1, George Street, Queen's Park, for the sum of $1,795,000. 2, approves the acquisition of 172, Lot 4, Railway Parade, Queen's Park, for the sum of $615,000. 3, pursuant to section 6.8 of the Local Government Act 1995, approves a budget amendment to 2020-21 adopted budget and allocates $2,410,000 from the city's Land and Building Reserve for the acquisition of the properties referred to in Part 1 and Part 2 above. And 4, authorises the Chief Executive Officer to undertake and finalise all actions required to complete the acquisitions. An absolute majority was required, and the deliberation governance was?
The motion was carried by absolute majority with 9 in favour, 2 voting against. Those voting against, councillors Barry and Kunza.
The matter being carried, we moved on to item CC 053 of 20. Confidential item, the title of which was the Chief Executive Officer's 2019-2020 Annual Performance and Salary Review. The officer's recommendation being that council, 1, in accordance with legislative, contractual and policy obligations, accepts the Chief Executive Officer Performance Appraisal Report, which includes the Chief Executive Officer's response to the performance report for 12 months ending June 2020, provided in confidential attachment 1. 2, approves the Chief Executive Officer key performance indicators for 2020-2021 period, provided in confidential attachment 2. And 3, approves the Chief Executive Officer's total remuneration package, which remains unchanged from the previous year. Governance, the deliberation was?
The motion was carried unanimously with 11 in favour.
The matter was passed unanimously. Thank you very much, councillors. Let me see. The time being, let me see, sorry. I've read along the council decisions. We'll go to item 17. Councillors, the time now is 8:21 p.m. and there being no further business, I now declare the meeting closed, and I'd like to thank everybody for their attendance, including our staff this evening. Thank you all.